The house stood at the edge of a quiet American suburb, its wooden porch sagging with years of secrets. On stormy nights, when the wind cut through the trees and the shutters rattled, neighbors swore they could hear faint whispers floating from its darkened windows. Whispers of a woman who had vanished, and a man who believed he had buried the past forever. If you think the past can be buried and forgotten, the narrator's voice seemed to echo through the storm. You haven't heard the story of David Miller and his wife, Martha Johnson. David was barely 32 when he married her. Young, handsome, and restless, he looked out of place beside Martha, a woman old enough to be his grandmother. At 71, Martha was a widow with money in the bank, land in her name, and a heart aching for companionship. People in town whispered, shaking their heads as they watched them walk hand in hand down Main Street. "He's only in it for the money," the butcher told his customer one afternoon. "She just wants someone to keep her warm at night," another voice chimed in. But Martha believed in love. She told her closest friend, "David makes me feel alive again. I don't care what anyone says." To her, this marriage was a second chance. To David, it was a golden ticket. Behind the charming smile and sweet words lay a man who wanted more than comfort. He wanted control, wealth, freedom. For a while, they lived quietly. To outsiders, David played the role of a doting husband. He opened doors for Martha, held her arm as they strolled through town, and even sat beside her in church. Yet at night, lying awake in their dimly lit bedroom, darker thoughts crept into his mind. Thoughts of how long Martha might live. Thoughts of what life would be like if she were gone. No one could have known then that their marriage would not be remembered for its scandalous age gap, but for the crime that would haunt a town and a man for the next decade. At first glance, David and Martha's marriage looked almost theatrical, like a stage play that had wandered off Main Street and into the gossip columns. He was 32, tall, broad-shouldered, and with the kind of rugged handsomeness that turned heads. She was 71, silver-haired, gentle, her face lined with years of living but softened by kindness. To most outsiders, the pairing was absurd. The neighbors never stopped whispering. At the diner, over coffee and pie, conversations turned to them. "He's charming her right into her grave," muttered Mrs. Hensley, clutching her mug. "Don't be so cruel," replied her friend. "She deserves happiness. If she wants to spend her last years with a younger man, so be it." "Yeah, but happiness doesn't drain your bank account," came the sharp retort. Martha ignored the murmurs. For her, David represented something rare, a chance to feel cherished again. She had lost her husband 15 years earlier to cancer, and the loneliness had carved deep hollows in her life. David's sudden attention had felt like sunlight breaking through a long, gray winter. One evening, sitting by the fire, Martha looked at David with misty eyes. "People can say what they want," she whispered, her hand trembling slightly in his. "You make me feel alive again, David. That's all that matters." David smiled, leaning closer, brushing his lips against her forehead. "I'll always take care of you, Martha. You don't need to worry." The words sounded tender, but inside, his thoughts were far colder. He studied her hands, spotted with age. He thought about the deed to the land folded neatly in her desk drawer. He remembered the savings account she'd once mentioned, almost absent-mindedly, as though it weren't important. To David, every smile was an investment. Every affectionate gesture, a step closer to the prize. Still, there were moments when Martha's love caught him off guard. She would surprise him with small kindnesses, a home-cooked meal of roast chicken, a knitted scarf for the winter, or a note tucked into his lunchbox when he went out to work odd jobs. Her devotion was genuine, pure in a way David hadn't experienced before. Sometimes, for the briefest flicker, he wondered if he could return it. But then came the parties. With Martha's money, David began to buy more. New clothes, a truck, rounds of drinks for his buddies. When they asked where it all came from, he laughed it off. "Married life's good, boys," he'd say, raising his glass. "Treat your woman right, and she'll treat you better." They didn't see the edge in his smile. Martha, meanwhile, aged further under the weight of years, though her spirit never dimmed. She clung to David with a quiet pride, convinced she had beaten loneliness. Yet in her blind trust, she overlooked the cold calculation behind his eyes. One Sunday after church, Martha overheard a whisper in the parking lot. "She's a fool," a woman said, shaking her head. "Doesn't she see he's bleeding her dry?" Martha paused, her cheeks flushing, but she walked on with David's arm hooked around hers. That night, she told him softly, "They'll never understand us. But I don't care. I know your heart." David kissed her cheek, hiding the smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "That's all you need to know." And so the charade continued, her devotion deepening, his patience wearing thinner. The whispers outside grew louder, but inside the house, the silence between them carried a tension no one else could hear. A storm was building, though Martha had no idea she was standing in its center. The night it happened, the sky opened like a wound. Rain lashed against the windows, rattling them in their frames. Thunder rolled across the valley, shaking the old house as though some invisible hand were pounding at its walls. The storm outside matched the storm inside David's mind. He sat at the kitchen table with a half-empty bottle of whiskey, staring at the clock as its hands crept toward midnight. Each tick seemed to echo in his skull. Martha had gone to bed early, tired from the day, her frail body curled beneath the heavy quilt. Upstairs, she slept in the innocence of trust. Downstairs, David was thinking of betrayal. For weeks, he had been restless, his thoughts circling the same dark conclusion. He could no longer stand the waiting. The years stretched before him like a prison sentence, one he refused to serve. He thought of the land, the money, the freedom he would have if Martha were gone. He thought of his friends' laughter, their reckless lives, and how he envied them. Tonight, the storm whispered to him that it was time. He rose unsteadily, the wooden chair scraping across the floor. His footsteps creaked on the old staircase as he climbed, each step heavier than the last. When he reached the bedroom, he stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching Martha sleep. Her silver hair was spread across the pillow. Her chest rose and fell in gentle rhythm. She looked peaceful, almost saintly. A flicker of hesitation touched him, a memory of her kindness, the way she had once pressed his hand and whispered, "I know your heart." For a second, guilt stabbed him, sharp and unwelcome. But greed drowned it out. He moved closer, standing over her. The storm boomed outside, lightning flashing through the thin curtains, casting the room in a ghostly glow. David's hands trembled, not from fear but from the weight of what he was about to do. He leaned down, pressing one hand against her throat. Martha stirred, her eyes fluttering open in confusion. At first, she smiled faintly, thinking he was waking her for some trivial reason. But then she saw his face, tight, merciless, and her smile died. "David, what are you doing?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. His grip tightened. Her hands shot up, clawing at his arms, her frail strength no match for his. Panic surged in her eyes. "David, please, why?" His teeth clenched. Rain hammered against the roof, drowning out her gasps. "Because you've lived long enough," he growled. "And I'm done waiting." She tried to scream, but it came out as a strangled cry swallowed by the storm. Her body thrashed weakly beneath him, her nails scraping at his skin, but within seconds, her fight was fading. Her eyes widened in terror, then glazed with disbelief as the life drained from them. When it was over, silence filled the room. Only the storm bore witness to what he had done. David stumbled back, staring at her still form, chest heaving. For the first time, the reality of his crime crashed down on him. He had crossed a line he could never step back from. But fear quickly turned to calculation. He dragged her limp body from the bed, her nightgown soaking up the rainwater that blew through the open window. Down the stairs, through the kitchen, and out into the storm he carried her. The backyard was a mire of mud, the rain turning the earth into a sucking swamp. David grabbed the shovel he had stashed earlier, each strike of metal against wet ground clanging in his ears. Lightning split the sky as he dug furiously, the hole widening, deepening. Sweat and rain stung his eyes, but he didn't stop until the ground yawned open before him. He lowered her into the shallow grave, her body twisting slightly as it landed with a dull thud. For a moment, he froze, the sight of her lifeless face illuminated by a jagged bolt of lightning. Those eyes, even in death, seemed to accuse him. He forced himself to look away, shoveling dirt back into the hole, burying not just her body but the evidence of his betrayal. By the time he finished, his muscles burned, his breath ragged. He patted the wet soil flat with the back of the shovel, as if smoothing out the wrinkles of a bedsheet. The storm began to ease, the thunder rolling farther away, but inside David there was no calm, only the chilling realization of what he had done. He leaned on the shovel, muttering to himself, "It's over now. No one will ever know." But the truth has a way of clawing out of the dirt. The storm ended that night, but for David, a different kind of storm had only begun. By morning, the ground behind the house looked undisturbed, just another patch of rain-soaked soil. Martha Johnson, 71 years old, widow and faithful wife, had seemingly vanished into thin air. When neighbors asked, David had his story prepared. She wanted to visit some family up north, he explained, his voice calm. Practiced. She packed a few things and left before dawn. Said she needed a change of scenery. At first, people believed him. Martha was elderly, they reasoned, and grief had made her unpredictable in the past. Maybe she really had wandered off. The sheriff asked a few routine questions, then closed the file when no trace of her turned up. No body, no evidence, no crime. David should have felt free. And for a while, he did. With Martha gone, he wasted no time dipping his hands into her accounts. He sold off her jewelry, traded her old sedan for a brand new truck, and started dressing sharper, showing up at the local bar with crisp shirts and the smell of expensive cologne. His buddies noticed. "Living good, huh, Miller?" One of them teased, clapping him on the back. David smirked, lifting his glass. "Married life was good while it lasted. Guess I got lucky." They laughed, not knowing how close to the truth that was. But beneath the swagger, shadows clung to him. Every time he stepped into the backyard, his eyes flicked toward the place where the soil was just a shade darker than the rest. At night, lying alone in bed, he sometimes swore he heard faint rustling outside the window, like footsteps dragging through the wet grass. Months turned to years. David bought himself more freedom with Martha's money. Trips to the city. Poker nights that stretched till dawn. Brief affairs with women who didn't ask too many questions. He wore his new life like a fresh suit, but underneath, the lining was unraveling. One evening at the bar, a friend leaned close, lowering his voice. "Ever hear from your wife? Folks still ask about her." David forced a chuckle. "She's gone, man. Doesn't want to be found. Some people just disappear." But the question lingered, buzzing in his head long after the bar lights dimmed. By the 5th year, the whispers began to circle back. Some neighbors wondered aloud why no postcard, no phone call, no trace of Martha had ever surfaced. Her absence felt heavier with each passing season, and though no one accused David outright, suspicion hung around him like smoke. The weight pressed harder in private. Alone in the house, he began locking doors compulsively, double-checking the windows at night. He drank more, sometimes until he passed out on the couch, the bottle still in his hand. In the quiet hours, when the wind rattled the porch, he sometimes thought he heard her voice. "David," it seemed to call, soft but clear. "David." He would jolt awake, heart pounding, sweat drenching his shirt. The house would be silent again, but the echo stayed. On the 10th anniversary of her disappearance, David stood in the yard staring at the patch of earth where she lay. The grass had grown uneven, a thin scar across the lawn. He pressed his boot into the soil, whispering through clenched teeth, "You're not coming back. You can't." But deep inside, something gnawed at him. Because he knew the truth. A body could be buried, but guilt could not. That night, as rain tapped against the windows once more, David sat alone in the kitchen, a cigarette glowing between his fingers. The years of indulgence had carved new lines into his face, but his eyes told the real story. Haunted, restless, never at peace. He thought he had buried Martha Johnson in the dirt behind his house. What he didn't know was that the past had a way of clawing itself free, and that his 10 years of stolen freedom were almost at their end. It was a Tuesday night in late October, the kind of night when the wind sharpened and the leaves scraped across the pavement like restless spirits. David had been drinking again. Empty bottles crowded the table, their labels smeared with his fingerprints. He sat slouched in his chair, eyes fixed on the flickering glow of the television, though he couldn't have told you what program was on. His mind had been drifting more often lately, circling memories he wanted buried. Then came the knock. It was soft at first, 3 measured raps against the front door. David blinked, startled. The clock read 11:47. No one visited at this hour. He held his breath, waiting to see if it was his imagination. The knock came again, louder this time. He pushed back his chair, heart thudding in his chest. "Who the hell's out there?" he barked, voice cracking. Silence. David grabbed the baseball bat he kept near the door and swung it open. There she was. Martha Johnson stood on his porch, bathed in the pale light of the street lamp. She wore the same faded floral dress she'd been buried in, the one he remembered clinging to her as he lowered her into the mud. Her silver hair, once neat, hung damp around her face. And her eyes, those same soft brown eyes, were fixed on him with a look that chilled him to his marrow. For a moment, David couldn't breathe. His throat closed, his legs turned weak. The bat slipped from his hands and clattered against the floorboards. Martha! The name tore out of him, raw and broken. She didn't speak. She only stood there, watching, her lips pressed together as if holding back words too heavy to say. Panic surged through him. He slammed the door shut so hard the glass rattled. Leaning his back against it, he pressed both palms flat to the wood, gasping for air. It's not real. It's the whiskey. I'm seeing things. Minutes passed before he dared open it again. The porch was empty. David stumbled back, rubbing his eyes with shaking hands. He told himself it was a trick of the light, a drunken dream. But deep down he knew better. That night, he didn't sleep. Every creak of the house felt amplified. Every shadow stretched long across the walls. At one point, he swore he heard the faint drag of footsteps along the hallway, a slow, deliberate shuffle that stopped right outside his bedroom door. He pulled the covers over his head like a child, whispering to himself, "She's gone. She's gone. She can't come back." But when he finally drifted into a shallow, restless doze, he dreamt of her standing at the foot of his bed, her voice a whisper carried by the storm outside. "You can't bury the truth, David." When morning came, the world outside looked ordinary again, sunlight warming the porch, birds hopping in the yard. But David was no longer the same. His hands trembled as he lit a cigarette, his eyes darting constantly toward the door. He told himself he'd imagined it, but the truth gnawed at him. Because what he had seen, what he had felt when those eyes locked on his, was too real, too vivid. It was only the beginning. The first night she appeared on his porch, David convinced himself it was whiskey and nerves. But after that, Martha came everywhere, uninvited, silent, watching. It started small, a shadow moving across the mirror when he shaved, the faint sound of slippers scuffing against the hardwood floor, the scent of her lavender perfume drifting through the hallway long after midnight. He tried to rationalize it. It's memory. It's guilt. It's nothing. But no excuse could explain the whispers. David, the first time he heard it, he spun around so fast the chair tipped backward. The living room was empty, the curtains swaying in a draft. He pressed both hands to his head, trembling. I'm losing it. I'm losing my damn mind. But the whispers didn't stop. They grew bolder. One night, while he sat on the couch clutching a bottle, the television snapped to static. The screen glowed white, humming softly. And through the hiss came her voice. You thought you could bury me. David staggered to his feet, shouting at the empty room. Shut up. You're dead, you hear me? Dead. His own voice echoed off the walls, but the static hummed back like mocking laughter. He smashed the bottle against the floor, shards flying across the carpet, and collapsed to his knees. Sleep became impossible. He lay in bed, eyes wide, straining to hear the house breathe. Every sound carried menace. A door creaking, pipes groaning, and always, the soft drag of footsteps moving down the hall, stopping outside his door. One night, he could no longer stand it. He flung the door open, bat in hand, ready to confront whatever phantom dared stalk him. The hallway stretched silent, empty, but the air was colder, sharp enough to sting his skin. At the far end of the hall, the mirror hanging on the wall reflected not just him, but her. Martha's face stared back, pale, her mouth twisted in a question that burned his soul. Why? David roared, swinging the bat at the mirror. Glass shattered, raining down like sharp tears. But when the shards hit the floor, he saw her eyes in every fragment. He ran, stumbling, slamming into walls, desperate to escape a house that no longer belonged to him. Days bled into weeks. His friends noticed the change. His clothes hung loose from his frame, his face gaunt, eyes wild. He stopped showing up at the bar. When one of them came by to check on him, David cracked the door only an inch. You okay, man? The friend asked. David's voice rasped. She's here. She won't leave. Who? Martha. David hissed, eyes darting to the shadows. She's back. She knows what I did. The friend tried to laugh it off, But David's expression froze the smile on his lips. "Get some rest," he muttered before walking away. But inside, David returned to his prison of whispers. The haunting grew more violent. The radio blared by itself at 3 a.m., playing Martha's favorite hymn. Lights flickered, plunging him into darkness, then snapping back on to reveal her silhouette in the corner. Sometimes he would wake to find muddy footprints leading from the back door to his bed, prints that matched the slippers Martha used to wear. David stopped eating, stopped shaving. He sat for hours at the kitchen table, muttering to himself, chain-smoking until his fingers shook. Every knock at the door, every gust of wind sent him into a frenzy. One stormy night, 10 years to the week since he buried her, the haunting reached its peak. The rain hammered the windows, thunder cracking overhead, just like the night he killed her. As he sat trembling in the living room, the lights died. From the darkness came her voice, louder now, unmistakable. "You can't bury the truth, David." He stumbled backward, heart slamming in his chest. "Stay away from me," he screamed. "I did what I had to do." The front door creaked open on its own. Wind howled through the room, scattering papers, slamming cabinet doors. And there, standing in the doorway, was Martha. No longer silent, no longer a shadow. Her eyes locked on his, her expression unreadable, yet filled with judgment he could not escape. David collapsed to his knees, sobbing. "I'm sorry. God, I'm sorry." But Martha did not answer. She only stepped closer, her presence cold as the grave. And David knew. The past he had tried to bury was back, and this time, it had come to finish what it started. The storm outside raged like a drumbeat, pounding against the old house. Inside, David Miller crouched on the floor, his body trembling, his breath ragged. His eyes never left the figure in the doorway. Martha. She stood where the shadows met the storm light, her floral dress damp and clinging to her thin frame. Her hair, once brushed with care, hung wild and wet across her face. The smell of earth clung to her, heavy and unmistakable. The smell of the grave he had dug 10 years ago. "You can't be here," David croaked, his voice breaking like glass. "You're dead. I buried you myself." Martha's lips curved, not into a smile, but into something colder. Her eyes pierced him, steady and unblinking. He scrambled backward, palms scraping against the wooden floor. "Stay away." His voice cracked with desperation. "I did what I had to do." The air dropped to a biting chill. Every light in the house flickered, buzzing violently, then went out, leaving the room awash in shadows. Only lightning lit the space now, flashes revealing Martha stepping closer each time. One step, another, silent, inevitable. David tried to run. He lunged toward the back door, fumbling with the lock, but the handle burned cold in his grip, refusing to turn. Behind him came the soft drag of footsteps, the same sound that had haunted him for years, steady, relentless, drawing nearer. He spun, his chest heaving, his back pressed to the door. "What do you want from me?" Her voice, when it came, was not a whisper but a low, steady echo that filled the room. "Justice." David's knees buckled. He collapsed to the floor, tears streaking his face. "I'm sorry, Martha. I swear I'm sorry." He pounded the floorboards with his fists. "I thought I could start over. I thought. You thought wrong." Her voice wrapped around him like chains. In the flash of lightning, he saw her hand extend, pale, dirt-stained, fingers reaching. "No." He shook his head violently, scrambling back. "Please, God, no." But her hand clamped onto his wrist. It was ice and iron all at once. The strength in that grasp defied logic, yanking him forward with the pull of the grave itself. He screamed, thrashing, clawing at the floorboards, his nails splintering against the wood. She dragged him through the living room, the lights flaring wildly, bulbs popping overhead. Furniture shook and toppled, as if an unseen force had joined her rage. His screams echoed through the house, swallowed by thunder. When she pulled him to the cellar door, he kicked wildly, his heels slamming against the wall. Not there. Not again. The door swung open with a groan, revealing the stairs plunging into darkness. The smell of damp earth and rot wafted upward, gagging him. "No, Martha, please," he begged, his voice raw. "I'll confess. I'll go to the police. Just don't take me down there." But Martha did not falter. Her grip tightened, and with one brutal pull, she dragged him down into the cellar. He stumbled, tumbling against the wooden steps, his body crashing to the dirt floor below. In the pitch-black basement, lightning slashed through the narrow windows, illuminating the far corner. There, beneath a warped piece of floorboard, was the outline of the box he had buried years ago, the coffin of his crime. David's screams became a howl of pure terror. "No, it's not real. You're not real." But Martha knelt beside the box, her hand still crushing his wrist. With the other, she brushed away the dirt, exposing the wood. The lid creaked open as though answering her touch, and the stench of decay flooded the room. David gagged, his stomach twisting, tears pouring down his face. He saw what lay inside, remnants of the woman he had killed, and his mind cracked. "Get in," her voice commanded, sharp and final. He shook his head, sobbing. "I can't. I won't." The house trembled, dust raining from the beams, as if the very earth demanded payment. Martha's grip became unbearable, and with one violent thrust, she shoved him toward the open box. His scream ripped through the storm, piercing, desperate, then cut off abruptly. By morning, the storm had passed. The house was quiet again. When neighbors came looking, drawn by the night's strange sounds, they found the cellar door ajar. And inside, lying slumped beside the rotting coffin, was David Miller, lifeless, his face twisted in horror, as though he had looked straight into death and recognized it. Beside him, the coffin was shut tight once more. And though no one spoke it aloud, the town knew Martha Johnson had come home. By dawn, the storm had blown itself out. The town awoke to streets littered with branches, the air still heavy with the smell of rain. At the edge of town, the old Miller house sat silent, its shutters hanging loose, its porch sagging under the weight of secrets no storm could wash away. It was a neighbor who first noticed the cellar door standing open. Curious, he stepped inside, calling David's name. What he found sent him staggering backward into the yard, pale as the morning light. Within the hour, sirens wailed down the street, red and blue lights dancing against the wet pavement. In the basement, officers discovered David's body slumped beside a rotting wooden box. His face was twisted in terror, his fingers curled into claws as though he'd tried to fight something no one else could see. The coroner would later mark it down as cardiac arrest brought on by extreme stress. But among the townspeople, the story spread quickly. Martha Johnson had returned. At the diner, whispers filled the booths once again. They say he was lying right next to her coffin. 10 years she was gone, and she came back for him. Maybe some things just can't stay buried. No one wept for David. For years, folks had doubted him, their suspicion festering like an open wound. Now, with his sudden and terrifying death, their doubts hardened into certainty. He had killed her, and in the end, he had paid the price. On Sunday, the pastor preached to a hushed congregation. His words carried the weight of the storm still lingering in everyone's hearts. "The truth," he said, "is a living thing. You can try to bury it, but it will rise. It will knock at your door until you answer." The Miller house was abandoned soon after. Weeds crept up through the yard, swallowing the scar in the lawn where Martha had once been hidden. Children dared each other to run up to the porch and knock, just to see if anyone, or anything, would answer. And sometimes, when the wind blew just right, neighbors swore they heard it. 3 slow raps on the old wooden door, echoing through the night. As if Martha was still there. As if she had never left.